It hurts. I cannot move. The words scraped from my throat as I collapsed against cold stone, my legs folding beneath me like a newly born foal. Every breath felt like shattered glass grinding through my ribs. The metallic taste of blood coated my tongue. The great hall stretched impossibly far before me, torches casting dancing shadows across tapestries of ancient battles. 4 warriors stood frozen around a massive oak table, their war plans abandoned mid-sentence. Maps, daggers holding parchment corners, goblets of wine steaming in the winter air, and then silence. It hurts. I cannot move. My whisper cut through that silence like a blade through silk. I watched their heads turn, watched leather and steel shift as powerful bodies went absolutely still. The blood staining my torn servant dress spread darker with each passing heartbeat. I should never have come here, should never have crawled through midnight corridors to disturb the Alpha King's war council. But I had nowhere else left to go, nowhere else to die. What King Christopher did next shattered every law, broke every tradition, and transformed not just my fate, but the soul of an entire kingdom. This is how it happened. My name is Alina. I need to say that first, before the pain takes the words, before everything that happens next makes you forget I was ever just a girl with a name. I am 19 summers old, an Omega servant in the castle kitchens who scrubbed floors until my knees bled and prayed to the moon goddess to remain invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant the nobles did not notice you. Invisible meant you might survive long enough to buy your freedom contract, might escape to the northern villages where Omegas could live without fear. But invisibility requires careful planning when your body betrays you. The heat suppressants cost 3 months' wages. Bitter herbs brewed by the castle healer, drunk every new moon to keep my Omega nature dormant, to keep my scent muted, to keep me safe from alphas who saw Omegas as property, as pleasure, as things to be used and discarded. I had been saving for the next batch. I was 2 weeks short. That is when my body decided it would no longer wait. The heat came on me during evening meal preparations, sudden and vicious as a winter storm. My skin burned. My scent bloomed through the kitchen like wildflowers and honey, impossible to hide. The other servants smelled it first, their eyes going wide with pity and fear. Then head steward Marcus entered. He was a beta, which made him crueler than most alphas. Betas resented being caught between 2 natures, neither powerful enough to command nor vulnerable enough to deserve protection. Marcus took his resentments out on those beneath him, especially Omegas. You! His voice cut through the kitchen clatter like a butcher's blade. You reek of heat, girl. How long have you been hiding your nature? I tried to run. Foolish, desperate, useless. He caught me by my braid at the base of the tower stairs, his grip crushing. Lying Omega filth, he snarled. You think you can work in the king's castle, eat the king's bread, and hide what you are? You think you have rights? I told him I had paid my contract price, that I worked honestly, that I harmed no one. He laughed. Then he dragged me up 3 flights of stone stairs and threw me down them. I remember the first impact, my shoulder striking stone. The second, my ribs cracking like dry branches. The third, fourth, fifth, all bleeding together into an avalanche of agony, then nothing but cold floor and the taste of copper. When I woke, Marcus was gone. The tower was empty. My body screamed with every breath. Something was broken inside me, deeper than ribs. Something that made each movement feel like dying. But I could not stay there. He would return. Or he would send others. Or I would simply bleed into the stone and become another nameless servant who disappeared in the night. So I crawled. Through empty corridors, past guard rotations I had memorized from 2 years of invisible servitude, down servants' passages that nobles never saw. Each movement was agony. Each breath a prayer I did not believe would be answered. I did not plan to reach the Great Hall. I did not plan anything except the next pull of my arms, the next drag of my broken body across stone. But the doors were open. Torchlight spilled out like salvation, and I crawled toward light because darkness meant dying alone. 4 warriors stood around the war table when I collapsed at the threshold. I recognized them from serving meals, from filling wine goblets with trembling hands while they discussed battles and territories and the price of conquest. Gideon, the king's right hand, scarred and silent. Rowan, the strategist with maps always in his hands. Dante, youngest of the commanders, barely 20 summers but already legendary with a blade. And King Christopher. Alpha King Christopher, thou who had conquered 3 kingdoms before his 25th summer, whose name made enemies surrender and allies bow, who they said had ice in his veins and death in his eyes. He stood at the head of the table, golden hair braided for war, leather and steel fitted to his body like a second skin. Power radiated from him like heat from forge fire. I collapsed at his feet. It hurts. I cannot move. The words were all I had left. My vision blurred, blood pooled beneath me. I waited for them to step over my body, to call servants to remove the dying Omega from their war council. Instead, King Christopher dropped to his knees beside me. The great hall went absolutely silent. An Alpha King did not kneel, not for servants, not for Omegas, not for anything except coronation and death rites. But he knelt beside me in my blood and broken breathing, and when he spoke, his voice held something I had never heard from an Alpha before. Gentleness. Who did this to you? I expected guards to carry me to the servants' quarters. Perhaps the healer's wing if I was fortunate. More likely they would leave me in the corridor to either heal or die without disturbing noble sensibilities. Instead, King Christopher lifted me into his arms himself. The movement sent lightning through my broken ribs. I bit my lip hard enough to taste fresh blood, refusing to cry out. Omegas who showed weakness invited more cruelty, but a small sound escaped anyway, pitiful and broken. Easy. His voice rumbled through his chest against my ear. I have you. You are safe now. Lies. Pretty lies Alphas told before they hurt you worse. I had heard them before from nobles who cornered servants in dark hallways, but his arms remained gentle despite their strength, careful of my injuries in ways that made no sense. Your Majesty, this is irregular. Gideon's voice carried warning. The council will question why you personally attend to a servant. We have healers for such matters. Then let them question. Christopher's tone allowed no argument. Rowan, clear my chambers. Dante, fetch Master Aldrich immediately. Tell him to bring supplies for broken ribs and internal injuries, and tell him to come alone. But sire, now! Footsteps scattered. The king moved through corridors with steady purpose, his alpha scent wrapping around me like a physical shield. Pine and smoke and something wilder, mountain storms and winter wind. My Omega instinct screamed at me to submit, to make myself smaller, to apologize for bleeding on his leather armor. But his scent also did something unexpected. It eased the agony radiating from my ribs, made my racing heart slow, made the darkness at the edges of my vision pull back just enough to keep me conscious. We climbed stairs, past tapestries I had only seen while cleaning, entered a wing of the castle where servants walked quickly with eyes down, where noble guests resided, where power lived. Then through doors carved with wolves and crowns into chambers that stole my remaining breath. The king's personal rooms. I should never have been here. These spaces existed for queens and councils, for noble alliances and royal ceremonies, not for Omega servants who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. Christopher laid me on furs softer than anything I had ever touched. His bed, the Alpha King's own bed. Panic cut through pain. This was wrong. This broke every rule. They would accuse me of seduction, of using Omega tricks to manipulate him. They would execute me for daring to bleed on royal linens. I tried to sit up, to explain, to leave before this became worse. His hand on my shoulder stopped me with gentle pressure. Be still. You are gravely injured. Moving will only cause more damage. Please, my voice cracked. I should not be here. The servants' quarters. Anywhere but... You are exactly where you need to be. His eyes met mine, ice blue and absolute, and no one will touch you here without answering to me." The door burst open. An elderly man entered carrying a leather bag, his silver hair wild as if he had been roused from sleep. Master Aldrich, the king's personal physician. And I had seen him in the great hall during feasts, seated near the high table, respected by Wobolsies and feared by malingering soldiers. He took one look at me and his expression went grim. "Move aside, Christopher. Let me see what we are dealing with." His familiarity with the king spoke of decades of service. He set his bag on the bedside table and began examining me with quick, efficient movements. I tried not to scream as his hands probed my ribs. Failed. The sound that escaped was animal and ashamed. Broken ribs, at least 4. Master Aldrich's voice grew colder with each discovery. Internal bleeding, likely from the spleen or liver, severe bruising across her back and shoulders, his hands stilled on my left arm. And these marks, old bruises beneath new ones. This was not a single incident. My shame burned hotter than fever. Son, he could see it. All of it. Every time Marcus had shoved me into walls when I was too slow. Every kick when I spilled something. Every cruelty I had learned to hide beneath long sleeves and careful movements. How long? Master Aldrich's hands shook as he prepared bandages. How long has this been happening to you, child? I could not answer. Speaking would make it real, would make me complicit in my own suffering for enduring it so long. Christopher's voice cut through my silence like a blade. How long has my castle harbored someone who beats Omegas near to death? The raw fury in those words made me flinch, but it was not directed at me. It was grief and rage twisted together, the sound of a man discovering poison in his own house. Master Aldrich worked through the night. He wrapped my ribs. It gave me bitter draughts for pain that made the room swim. Pressed careful hands to my abdomen, monitoring for signs the internal bleeding would worsen. Each touch was professional, kind, nothing like Marcus's cruelty. And through it all, Christopher remained. He should have left, should have returned to his war council, his strategies, his kingdom that needed ruling. Instead, he pulled a chair beside the bed and sat vigil while fever took me. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time I woke, he was there. Once I felt a cool cloth on my forehead. Another time, his voice murmured something I could not quite hear. The pain remained, but his presence kept it from drowning me entirely. Dawn light was creeping through the windows when the fever finally broke. My mind cleared enough to understand where I was, what had happened. The impossibility of an alpha king personally caring for a broken Omega servant. Christopher leaned forward, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. Master Aldrich said you would wake soon. He said you will survive, though recovery will take time. I nodded, unable to find words. His expression shifted into something harder, more dangerous. Now I need you to answer one question truthfully. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the command in it was absolute. Who did this to you? I hesitated. Speaking the name would unleash something terrible. Marcus had connections, friends among the noble houses. He would call me a liar, would paint me as a scheming Omega trying to cause trouble. But Christopher waited with the patience of someone who had interrogated enemies and extracted confessions from the unwilling. And I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead felt like relief. He already knew. He simply needed me to confirm it. Marcus. The name left my lips like poison. Head Steward Marcus. For a long moment, Christopher said nothing. Did not move. Did not even seem to breathe. Then something woke behind his eyes. Something ancient and lethal. Something that reminded me why conquered kingdoms spoke his name with fear. Thank you. His voice remained soft, conversational. Rest now. You are under my personal protection. No one will harm you again. He stood, moved toward the door with predatory grace. Your Majesty? My voice stopped him at the threshold. What will you do? He looked back at me, and for just a moment, I saw past the gentle alpha who had carried me to safety. Saw the warrior king who had ended dynasties and rewritten borders. I am going to have a conversation with my head steward. His smile held no warmth, only promise. And when that conversation is finished, you will never need to fear him again. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. I lay in his bed, surrounded by furs and firelight, and I understood with terrible certainty that I had just set something irreversible into motion. By speaking Marcus's name, I had sealed his fate. I spent 3 days in the king's chambers while my body slowly remembered how to heal. Master Aldrich visited twice daily, changing bandages and monitoring for signs of infection. A young servant girl named Petra brought meals on silver trays, her eyes wide with questions she dared not ask. Why was an Omega in the king's personal rooms? Why did guards stand outside the door with orders to let no one pass without royal permission? I wondered the same things. Christopher came each evening after his duties ended. He never stayed long, just checked that I had everything I needed, that the pain drafts were working, that fear had not returned in his absence. Then he would settle into the chair by the hearth and read from books in his personal library, his voice low and steady, reading tales of ancient heroes and fallen kingdoms until sleep claimed me. It felt like a dream, like something that would shatter when I woke. On the 4th morning, Gideon and Rowan entered with faces carved from stone. I was sitting up for the first time, ribs protesting but manageable. Petra had just brought breakfast, soft bread and honey, luxuries I had never tasted in the servants' quarters. I set down the tray when I saw their expressions. Gideon spoke first, his scarred face carefully neutral. The king asked us to investigate your claims about head steward Marcus. We have spent 3 days questioning servants, examining records, following whispers that everyone heard but no one dared speak aloud. I braced myself for accusations. For them to say I had lied, that Marcus was respected, that an Omega's word meant nothing against a man of his position. Instead, Gideon's voice went hard as winter iron. We found 6 other women. The words hit like a fist to my barely healed ribs. Rowan stepped forward, leather folder in his hands. 6 Omega servants who worked in this castle over the past 4 years. All suffered under Marcus's authority. All were threatened into silence. He opened the folder, spread parchments across the furs covering my legs. Written testimonies in shaking script, names I recognized from the kitchens, the laundries, the invisible corners where Omegas labored and prayed no one noticed. Elena, 19 summers, thrown down the same tower stairs 2 years ago. Told if she spoke, Marcus would ensure her younger sister lost her position and starved. She stayed silent. Sarah, 21 summers, beaten so badly she could not walk for a week, locked in the cold storage until she promised never to speak of it. Mira, Cassandra, Joelle, Thea, 7 of us total. 7 Omega women Marcus had brutalized while the castle went about its business, while nobles feasted in the Great Hall, while the king conquered kingdoms and never knew poison festered in his own household. My hands shook as I read their words, their pain written in careful letters, finally given voice after years of enforced silence. But this is not the worst of it. Rowan's voice dropped lower, and I saw fury in his eyes that reminded me he was not just a strategist, but a warrior who had killed men in battle. Marcus was not acting alone. Gideon produced another set of documents, financial ledgers. We found these hidden in Marcus's private chambers, payment records going back 3 years. I did not understand at first. Then I saw the dates, the amounts, the names attached to each transaction. Lord Blackwood, Lord Heron, Lady Morven. My stomach turned to ice. They were paying him. Rowan's words came clipped, precise, each one landing like a blade. Noble members of the Royal Council were paying Marcus for private access to Omega servants. Gold in exchange for an hour, sometimes a night, with vulnerable women who had no power to refuse. I thought I had known cruelty. Thought Marcus throwing me downstairs was the depths of what evil looked like. I was wrong. This was systematic, profitable, protected by the very people who made laws and dispensed justice. 14 transactions over 3 years. Gideon's finger traced entries in the ledger. sometimes the same Omega multiple times. Marcus would arrange the meeting, ensure privacy, and afterward guarantee silence through whatever means necessary. Threats, violence. In one case, his voice cracked slightly, he told an Omega her family would suffer accidents if she spoke. How many? My voice was barely a whisper. How many times did this happen before someone finally noticed? 14 recorded payments. Rowan closed the ledger with controlled fury. But we suspect there were others that left no paper trail. Favors traded instead of gold. Promises of advancement. Political alliances built on the suffering of Omega women who had no one to protect them. The chamber door opened. Christopher entered, and I watched both commanders straighten instinctively. The king looked at me first, checking that I was well. Then his gaze shifted to the documents scattered across the bed. Tell me. 2 words, quietly spoken. Gideon reported everything. Every name, every transaction, every brutal detail they had uncovered. Christopher listened without expression, without movement. That terrifying stillness I had seen once before, saw right before he promised Marcus would never harm me again. When Gideon finished, the silence stretched like a held breath. Then Christopher spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Summon the Royal Council. Every member. No exceptions. We convene at sunset. Your Majesty, the protocol for emergency sessions requires 3 days' notice. Rowan began. I do not care about protocol. Christopher's eyes were ice and fury. I care that members of my council have been paying my head steward to facilitate the assault of Omega servants under my own roof. That ends today. He moved to the window, looked out over the kingdom he had conquered and protected. Behind him, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control keeping rage contained. They will resist. Gideon's warning was gentle but firm. Lord Blackwood has significant military support. Lady Morven controls trade routes. If you move against them without careful planning, if I do nothing, I am complicit in their crimes. Christopher turned back, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Not just anger, grief. These atrocities happened in my castle, under my rule, while I was blind to the suffering of those I swore to protect. His gaze found mine across the chamber. You are not the first. The words seemed torn from somewhere deep. But by every god and ancestor, I will make certain you are the last. Rowan gathered the documents. What do you command? Prepare everything. Christopher's voice shifted into the tone of a king issuing battle orders. Every testimony, every ledger entry, every piece of evidence. I want it organized and unassailable. When the council convenes, they will see exactly what has been happening, and then they will answer for it. The commanders bowed and departed, leaving me alone with Christopher and the weight of what we had uncovered. He crossed to the bed, his expression softening slightly. I am sorry for all of it, that this happened, that I did not know, that you suffered while I remained ignorant. You did not know because we were meant to be invisible. The words came easier now. Omegas learn early that speaking brings punishment. Silence keeps us alive, no more. His hand covered mine, warm and steady. The silence ends today. You will be heard. They will all be heard. And the ones who profited from that silence will learn that some debts can only be paid in ruin. I looked at this alpha king who was rewriting every expectation I had ever held. And I understood something profound. I was not the first victim, but I was the first who survived long enough to reach someone who actually cared, and that was about to change everything. Gideon came for me an hour before sunset. You should not be walking yet. His voice carried concern as he helped me stand from the bed where I had spent 6 days healing. Master Aldrich will have my head if your ribs reopen. I need to see this. My legs trembled but held. I needed to watch Christopher face the nobles who had profited from our suffering, needed to see if justice was real or just another beautiful lie. He led me through hidden passages I had never known existed, servants' corridors built into the castle walls for invisible people to move unseen. We climbed narrow stairs. each step sending dull pain through my ribs despite the binding. Finally, we emerged into a small gallery overlooking the council chamber. Here, Gideon positioned me behind carved wooden screens where I could see without being seen. The king wanted you to witness this, to know that your voice matters, even when others pretend not to hear it. Below, the council chamber filled with lords and ladies in silk and velvet. 30 noble houses represented, each commanding armies and territories and wealth beyond measure. They took their seats around a massive circular table, voices raised in speculation about why they had been summoned with such urgency. Lord Blackwood sat to the left, a mountain of a man with silver threading his dark beard. Lord Heron across from him, younger, handsome, the kind of smile that hid cruelty. It's Lady Morven near the head, her beauty legendary, her ambition more so. I stared at them. These were the people who had paid gold to hurt women like me. The chamber doors opened. Christopher entered, flanked by Rowan and Dante, his presence silencing conversation like a blade cutting speech. He wore full royal regalia tonight, crown of twisted silver, cloak bearing the kingdom's wolf sigil. Not the gentle alpha who had sat beside my bed reading. This was the conqueror, the king who had ended dynasties. He took his place at the head of the table, did not sit, simply stood there in silence until even the whispers died. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." His voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. "I have called this emergency session because I have discovered something that cannot wait for protocol or procedure." Rowan moved forward, placed the leather folders on the table, began distributing documents to each council member. "What is this?" Lord Blackwood's voice boomed. "Financial records? Testimonies? What matter requires such drama? The matter of systematic abuse occurring within these castle walls." Christopher's tone remained level. "For years, under my own roof, Omega servants have been brutalized. And worse, that brutality has been facilitated and profited from by members of this very council." The chamber erupted. "Preposterous!" Lady Morven rose, face flushed with outrage. "You summon us here to discuss servant discipline? This is beneath the dignity of—" "Sit down." 2 words quietly spoken, but carrying such command that Lady Morven sank back into her chair as if struck. Christopher waited until silence returned. "I read the documents before you. Read the testimonies of 7 Omega women. Read the financial ledgers showing payments made to head steward Marcus. Then tell me this is beneath our dignity." I watched nobles flip through pages, their expressions ranging from genuine horror to carefully controlled fury. Some had not known, but others, their faces revealed guilt in the tightness around their eyes, the way they gripped parchment too hard. "This is fabricated." Lord Heron threw his documents onto the table. "The word of Omega servants against respected nobles? Any court would dismiss this as slander. Which is precisely why the abuse continued unchecked." Rowan's voice cut through the chamber. "Because men like you knew no one would believe victims whose only crime was being born Omega." Lord Blackwood stood, his massive frame intimidating. "Even if these accusations were true, and I am not conceding they are, what business is it of the crown how nobles conduct their private affairs? What we do with servants in our employ? They are not in your employ." Christopher's voice went cold. "They are castle servants under my protection, and what was done to them was not private affairs. It was assault. Systematic, profitable, protected assault." He moved around the table with predatory grace, stopped directly in front of Lord Blackwood. "You paid Marcus 6 times, 3 different women. The last payment was 2 months ago." Lord Blackwood's face went purple. "You dare accuse me? I have served this kingdom for 30 years. My armies secured your southern borders. I will not stand here and be interrogated like a common criminal by a king who coddles Omegas." "Oh, then perhaps you should have thought of that before you committed crimes like a common predator." Christopher turned to address the full council. "I am stripping Marcus of his position effective immediately. He will face judgment for his crimes, and those who paid him will surrender lands equal in value to compensate his victims. The chamber exploded again. This is madness! Lady Morven's beauty twisted with rage. You cannot redistribute noble lands to servants. The precedent alone would destabilize. The precedent that nobles can purchase access to vulnerable omegas? Christopher's voice cracked like a whip. That precedent needs destroying. Your Majesty, please. An older lord rose, his tone conciliatory. We understand your anger. Perhaps monetary compensation, a formal apology, reforms to prevent future incidents. They will surrender their lands. Christopher's tone allowed no negotiation. The victims will receive property, security, and the means to build lives free from fear. That is justice. It is political suicide. Lord Heron slammed his fist on the table. Half the council will withdraw support. Our armies will return to their territories. You will spark civil war over Omega servants. Then so be it. The chamber went absolutely silent. Christopher stood before them, this alpha king who had conquered kingdoms through strategic brilliance and careful alliances, who understood politics and power and the delicate balance required to rule, and he was throwing it all aside. For us, I have built this kingdom on strength. His voice carried to every corner of the chamber. On conquest and alliances and calculated decisions. But what is the point of strength if I use it to protect only those who already have power? What is the point of justice if it applies only to those noble enough to deserve it? He placed both hands on the table, leaned forward. You think I fear civil war? I have fought 7 wars and won them all. You think I fear losing your armies? I conquered half this realm with 1/3 of the forces you command. You think I fear the political consequences of choosing mercy over tradition? His voice dropped to something more dangerous. I fear nothing except becoming the kind of ruler who lets innocent people suffer because it is convenient, because it is profitable, because it is traditional. This is insanity. Lord Blackwood's voice shook with rage. Omegas are servants! They have no right to property, no right to demand justice from their betters. This is the natural order of the natural order. Christopher's laugh held no humor. The natural order that allows the strong to brutalize the weak. The natural order that makes cruelty profitable. That natural order ends today. In my kingdom, under my rule. Lady Morven stood, her voice icy. Then you rule alone, Your Majesty. House Morven withdraws its support. We will return to our territories and wait for a wiser king to take the throne. Several other nobles rose with her, threats unspoken but clear. Christopher watched them with that terrible stillness. Then he spoke 5 words that would be remembered in histories for generations. This ends now, by my decree. Power rolled off him in waves, not just alpha dominance, but something more fundamental. The absolute authority of a king who had decided that mercy mattered more than politics, that justice was worth any price. Those who wish to leave may do so. His voice carried finality. Take your armies, return to your territories, but know this. Any noble who profits from the abuse of Omegas, any lord who treats the vulnerable as property, any house that stands against this decree will find themselves facing the full weight of the crown. Not in negotiation, not in compromise, in war. He straightened to his full height. I am Christopher, Alpha King of these realms. I have ended dynasties and rewritten borders, and I will burn every corrupt house to ashes before I allow this evil to continue. The chamber held its breath. Then, slowly, an older lord stood. Lord Castellan, whose daughter was an Omega. Your Majesty is right. This must end. House Castellan supports your decree. Another noble rose, then another. Not all, but enough. Lord Blackwood stared at Christopher with pure hatred. You will regret this. No. Christopher's smile held no warmth. You will. Gideon, take Lord Blackwood, Lord Heron, and Lady Morven into custody. They will remain as guests of the crown until their land transfers are complete. This is unlawful imprisonment. This is justice. Christopher turned his back on them, the ultimate dismissal. And it is long overdue. From my hidden gallery, I watched nobles argue and rage and threaten. Watched Christopher stand unmoved against the storm he had unleashed. And I finally understood. He was not just protecting me. He was declaring that Omegas mattered, that our pain had worth. Now that the old order of cruelty disguised as tradition was finished. Whatever came next, war or peace, loyalty or rebellion, he had chosen us. And kingdoms would never be the same. They brought Marcus to the throne room 3 days after the council session. I stood beside Christopher's throne, still bandaged but no longer confined to bed. He had asked if I wanted to witness this, had given me the choice to stay away, to let justice unfold without forcing me to face my tormentor again. I chose to watch. The throne room filled with courtiers and nobles, those who had supported Christopher's decree and those who remained out of fear rather than loyalty. They lined the walls in silk and jewels, whispering behind hands, waiting to see what mercy or vengeance looked like. The massive doors opened. Guards dragged Marcus forward. He looked smaller than I remembered. Prison had stripped away his authority, his fine steward's clothing replaced with rough prisoner's garb. Chains bound his wrists and ankles, rattling with each stumbling step. His face was pale as winter snow, eyes darting around the throne room like a trapped animal seeking escape. There was none. They forced him to his knees before the throne. He would not look at me, would not raise his eyes above the stone floor where his chains pooled like metal serpents. Christopher stood. The room fell silent. He did not descend from the dais, did not move toward Marcus with threats or violence, simply stood there, crown-catching torchlight, every inch the Alpha King who had conquered kingdoms. Marcus Thorne. His voice carried through the chamber with absolute clarity. "Former head steward of this castle. You have been held in custody while we investigated charges of systematic abuse against Omega servants under your authority." Marcus said nothing. His shoulders shook. "The investigation is complete." Christopher's tone remained level, controlled. 7 women came forward with testimonies. Financial records prove you accepted payment from nobles in exchange for providing them access to these women. 14 recorded transactions, likely more that left no paper trail. Still, Marcus stayed silent. We found evidence of beatings, threats against families, intentional isolation of victims to ensure their silence. One woman you locked in cold storage until she agreed never to speak of what you had done. Another you threatened with her sister's dismissal and starvation. A third you threw down tower stairs and left to die. At that, Marcus flinched, finally looked up, his eyes finding me beside the throne. I stared back. Let him see what he had made. Let him see the Omega who refused to die quietly. You have a choice. Christopher descended the dais steps with measured grace. Rowan moved forward, carrying documents and an inkwell. Gideon stood to the side with a leather-bound book. Sign over all properties in your name to your victims. Forfeit half your accumulated wealth to be distributed as compensation. Leave this kingdom permanently, banished with only a horse and supplies to reach the nearest border. Marcus's breath came in shaking gasps. Or refuse. Christopher stopped 3 paces away. And face public execution in the market square with every crime you committed proclaimed for all to hear. Your family name destroyed. Your legacy nothing but shame. The throne room held its breath. You have until I finish speaking to decide. Christopher's voice never rose, never fell, remained the same tone he might use to order troop formations or approve trade agreements. If you sign, you leave with your life. You will be escorted to the border and released. If you refuse, Dante will carry out your execution at dawn tomorrow, and I will personally ensure every detail of your crimes is recorded in the kingdom's histories. Beside me, Dante's hand rested on his sword hilt. I could see the hope in his eyes, the want for Marcus to refuse, to give them excuse for blood and steel. Marcus looked at the documents, at Christopher, at the assembled nobles watching his humiliation. Then he broke. I will sign. His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I will sign everything. Just let me live." Disappointment flickered across Dante's expression. Rowan placed the documents on the floor before Marcus, careful not to get too close to the man who had caused so much suffering. "Read each one aloud before you sign." Gideon opened his book, pen ready. "Your full confession will be recorded." And so Marcus read. Property deed for his family estate, transferred to me. Smaller holdings divided among Elena, Sarah, Mira, Cassandra, Joelle, and Thea. Half his wealth, accumulated through decades of service and cruelty, split 7 ways. With each signature, his hand shook harder. With each document, he diminished further. When the properties were settled, Gideon stepped forward. "Now your confession. Every crime, every woman, every payment received. Leave nothing out, or the deal is void and you face the executioner." Marcus spoke for an hour, detailed every cruelty, every transaction, every moment he had chosen gold and power over basic humanity. Gideon's pen scratched across parchment, recording words that would stand as testimony forever. The court watched in silence. Some nobles looked ill, others angry, a few satisfied that justice was finally being served. When Marcus finished, his voice was hoarse and broken. "It is done." Christopher signaled the guards. "Take him to the stables. Give him a horse, water, food for 3 days. Escort him to the northern border and release him." "Your Majesty, surely," Marcus began. "You are no longer permitted to speak in my presence." Christopher's voice went cold as mountain stone. "You have your life. That is more mercy than you deserve. More than you showed any woman under your power." The guards hauled Marcus to his feet. "If you ever return to this kingdom," Christopher continued, "the deal is void. You will be executed on sight. If I hear reports of you harming Omegas in any land, I will hunt you down personally. This is your only chance. Do not waste it." Marcus nodded frantically, chains rattling. They dragged him from the throne room. His sobs echoed off stone walls until the doors closed, cutting off the sound. Silence settled like snow. Christopher turned to me. "Is this justice enough?" he asked quietly, only for my ears. "I would have given you his blood if you wanted it." I thought about that, about revenge and violence, and whether his death would heal anything. "This is enough." My voice was steady. "He loses everything. His position, his wealth, his home, his name. He lives, but only as nothing. Only as exactly what he made us feel." Christopher's expression softened slightly. "Then it is finished." He addressed the court one final time. "Let this stand as precedent. Anyone who harms those under my protection, anyone who treats vulnerability as invitation for cruelty, will face the same choice: restitution and exile, or execution and eternal shame." He looked at each noble in turn. "The old order is dead. What rises in its place will be built on justice, not tradition, on protection, not exploitation, and anyone who cannot accept that has no place in my kingdom." By sunset, Marcus was beyond our borders. 7 property deeds sat in Master Aldrich's chambers, waiting to be distributed. And I stood in the throne room beside an alpha king who had chosen mercy when violence would have been easier, or justice when tradition would have been simpler. The reckoning was complete. Not through blood, though every alpha in that room had wanted it. Through something harder, more permanent. Through making our suffering matter more than his life. And that, I realized, was the truest form of justice. Master Aldrich's chambers became a place of transformation. 7 parchments lay across his work table, each one sealed with deep red wax bearing Christopher's royal sigil. The wolf and crown pressed into permanence. 7 property deeds that would rewrite not just our lives, but the very foundation of what Omegas could become in this kingdom. I stood beside the window, watching dawn light creep across the castle grounds. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus's banishment. 2 weeks of healing ribs and quiet conversations with a king who asked about my dreams instead of my service. 2 weeks of wondering if this was real or if I would wake to find myself back in the kitchens, scrubbing floors until my knees bled. The door opened. Christopher entered with Gideon and Rowan, their arms full of additional documents. "Are you ready?" Christopher's voice was gentle. "We can wait longer if you need more time to heal." "I am ready." The words came stronger than I expected. "I want to see this finished." He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his face from warrior to something softer. "Then let us give 7 women their futures. They sent for us one by one." Elena came first. I barely recognized her without the fear that usually hunched her shoulders. She was my age, 19 summers. With dark hair she kept braided tight against her skull. We had worked side by side in the laundries, scrubbing nobles' silks while pretending not to hear their cruel jokes about Omega servants. "Elena," Christopher gestured to the table. "Come forward, please." She approached like she might bolt at any moment. Her eyes darted to the parchments, to me, back to Christopher. "You told Gideon that Marcus threw you down the tower stairs 2 years ago, that he threatened your sister's position if you spoke." Christopher's voice carried no judgment, only acknowledgement. "That sister still works in the kitchens, yes?" Elena nodded mutely. "She has been promoted to head cook as of this morning. Full salary, permanent position. But that is separate from this." Rowan lifted a parchment, broke the seal with careful ceremony. This is the deed to a property 3 days north. 50 acres of pine forest, a cottage, a stream for fresh water. I am told you grew up in the northern territories before you came here." Elena's eyes went wide. "How did you—" "We asked what mattered to you." Christopher's tone suggested this was obvious. "The property is yours. No rent, no tribute, no contract binding you to service. Yours to keep, to sell, to pass to your children if you choose. Free and clear." Elena took the parchment with shaking hands, stared at the words written in formal script, at the seal that made it law. "I own this?" Her voice cracked. "Truly? Truly?" Christopher's expression softened. "You will never have to fear Marcus or anyone like him again. You have land, income from the timber rights, safety. That is what justice looks like." Elena burst into tears. Rowan steadied her gently, helped her to a chair. Gideon pressed a handkerchief into her hands while she sobbed out years of fear and pain and desperate hope. Sarah came next. She was older than the rest of us, 21 summers but looking ancient. I knew her story from whispered conversations in the servants' hall. Lord Heron had paid Marcus for access to her 3 separate times. 3 times she had endured what no one should survive once. She entered Master Aldrich's chambers with her head high, but I saw the tremor in her hands. Sarah. Christopher did not make her come closer, simply lifted a parchment and read aloud. Lord Heron's summer estate, 60 acres, stone manor house, vineyard producing enough wine to sell for substantial profit. Additionally, 10,000 gold pieces seized from Lord Heron's personal treasury. Sarah went absolutely still. "You suffered 3 documented assaults." Christopher's voice went hard. "No amount of property or gold can undo that harm, but it can give you the means to build whatever life you choose. The estate is profitable enough that you need never work again unless you wish to. The choice is yours." He crossed the chamber, placed the deed in her hands personally. "I am sorry this happened in my kingdom, under my watch. You deserved protection. You received cruelty instead. That fails you and it shames me." Sarah looked at him, this alpha king apologizing to an Omega servant. Then she looked at the deed. "I can truly never work again? Never have to bow and scrape and pray I remain invisible? Never." Christopher's word was absolute. "You are a landowner now. Nobles will have to treat you with respect or answer to me." Yeah, she laughed then, wild and broken and free. The sound echoed off stone walls like a bird escaping its cage. One by one they came. Mira received farmland seized from Lady Morven's holdings. Rich soil perfect for crops, a sturdy house, equipment to begin planting. Cassandra got a property near the eastern border with a mill. Water rights that would generate income for generations. Joelle received a small estate with sheep pastures. The wool trade alone would keep her comfortable for life. Thea, youngest at 17 summers, received a town property with 3 shops that paid rent. Steady income, respectable, safe. Each woman entered frightened and left transformed, not just by property but by the acknowledgement that our suffering mattered. That justice could be real instead of just a word nobles used to maintain control. Finally, Christopher turned to me. I had waited, watching each woman discover her future, watching centuries of tradition crumble into something that looked like hope. Alina. He lifted the last parchment. This belonged to Marcus's family for 4 generations. Small estate 2 days south, farmland, cottage, orchard producing apples and pears. Not the largest property, but profitable, peaceful, yours. I took the deed with hands that no longer shook, stared at my name written in formal script. Alina, landowner. Alina, free. You threw me down the tower stairs. Christopher's voice was quiet. You crawled through my castle bleeding and broken. You had every reason to die silently like Marcus intended. Instead, you survived long enough to reach me, to speak when silence was safer, to trust when trust was foolish. He met my eyes. This property is not charity. It is not kindness. It is what you earned by refusing to disappear. By surviving when surviving was the bravest thing you could do. I looked at the other women standing in Master Aldrich's chambers. 7 Omega servants who had scrubbed floors together, who had whispered comfort in dark corners, who had endured cruelties we never spoke aloud. Now we held property deeds, held futures, held proof that suffering could be answered with something besides more suffering. Christopher gestured us toward the door. Come, the great hall is prepared. I want the entire court to witness this. We walked through corridors where we had once moved invisible and silent, but this time guards nodded respect. Nobles stepped aside. Servants who had worked beside us in kitchens and laundries whispered words of hope. The great hall was filled with courtiers, the same chamber where I had collapsed 2 weeks ago, where Christopher had knelt beside me and asked who had hurt me. We entered together, 7 Omega women flanking our king. Christopher's voice rang out clear and absolute. These women were harmed under my roof. By my head, steward and nobles I trusted, that harm cannot be undone. But it can be answered. He gestured to our deeds. Each of these women now owns property seized from those who hurt them. Each is a landowner with full rights under kingdom law. Each will be treated with the respect and dignity they always deserved but were denied. The court stared at us. 7 Omegas who had been invisible suddenly visible, suddenly mattering. Let this stand as the new order. Christopher's words carried the weight of law. In my kingdom, vulnerability does not equal disposability. Suffering will be answered with justice, and anyone who harms those under my protection will lose everything they value. He looked at us then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Not pity, not charity. Recognition. Seeing us as people worthy of protection not despite our Omega nature but simply because we existed. We stood in that great hall holding parchments that proved we mattered. Marcus had fled with nothing but shame. The nobles who profited from our pain had lost lands and status. And we remained. With property, with futures, with the knowledge that sometimes, rarely, justice was not just a word but an action that transformed lives. 7 Omega women, 7 property deeds, and centuries of tradition crumbling into something that looked almost like hope. News traveled faster than ravens. Within a week, every corner of the kingdom knew what had happened. The Alpha King had given land to Omega servants, had stripped nobles of their properties, had banished his head steward and rewritten centuries of tradition because 7 women said they had been hurt. The reactions split the realm like an axe through wood. 3 noble houses withdrew their support entirely, packed their courts and returned to their territories, sending formal letters declaring Christopher unfit to rule. Too soft, they said, too concerned with servants to maintain proper order. A king who valued Omega testimony over noble privilege was a king who had forgotten what strength meant. Let them go. Christopher read their letters in his study while I sat nearby, still too injured for the journey to my new property. A kingdom built on the suffering of the vulnerable deserves to fall, but you need their armies. I kept my voice carefully neutral, not wanting to overstep. What if the Southern Territories rebel? What if... Then I will handle it. He set the letters aside. I conquered this realm once. I can do it again if necessary. But I will not compromise on this. Not for political convenience. Not for anyone. Other responses came swift and overwhelming. Lord Castellan, whose daughter was Omega, sent a pledge of eternal loyalty along with a personal letter thanking Christopher for making the kingdom safer for his child. Lady Ashford, who had an Omega grandson, donated funds to establish a shelter for Omega's fleeing abuse. Smaller houses with Omega family members they had hidden in shame suddenly felt safe enough to acknowledge them publicly. The common folk responded differently still. Gideon brought reports from the markets and villages. Mothers are crying in the streets, he said one evening, crying with relief that their Omega children might have futures beyond servitude and fear. Rowan added his observations. I heard a merchant in the lower city telling his daughter about you, Your Majesty, telling her that even kings can choose mercy. That power does not require cruelty. Christopher listened to these reports with an expression I was learning to read. Not pride exactly, more like someone discovering they might be worthy of the crown they wore. The castle itself transformed. Omega servants who had moved through corridors invisible suddenly walked with straighter spines. Not bold, not yet, but less hunched by fear. Kitchen staff whispered my name like a talisman. The girl who survived. The one who reached the king. I wanted to tell them I was not special, that I had simply been too broken to crawl anywhere else. But Petra, the young servant who brought my meals, disagreed. You were brave. She set down the dinner tray with careful reverence. You spoke when speaking meant dying. That matters, Miss Alina. Miss. Not just Alina. Not servant girl or Omega or invisible thing. Miss. The scandal of my continued residence near the king's chambers provided endless entertainment for courtiers with nothing better to discuss. She is living in guest quarters, they whispered behind perfumed hands. Near His Majesty's own rooms. Unchaperoned. Improper. She is recovering from nearly fatal injuries, others countered. Where else should she stay? The servants' quarters where she was attacked? So the whispers followed me through corridors. Some cruel, most simply curious. An Omega servant residing in the noble wing, eating meals on silver plates, reading books from the royal library. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like wearing clothes that did not fit. Instead, it felt like breathing freely for the first time. Christopher visited each evening after his duties ended. Always knocked. Always waited for permission to enter my chambers. Small courtesies that nobles took for granted, but that I had never experienced from any alpha. How are the ribs? He would ask, settling into the chair by the hearth that had become his customary spot. Better, less pain when I breathe. Master Aldrich says another week before I can travel safely. Good. Then he would produce a book from his private collection. Tonight I brought poetry from the Northern Territories. I thought you might enjoy it. We would read together, his deep voice bringing ancient words to life. Stories of heroes and battles, yes, but also quieter tales. Farmers and first snows, mothers and harvests, simple lives lived with dignity. Between poems, we talked. Not about my service or his kingdom at first. Safer topics, what foods I preferred, whether I liked winter or summer better. Small things that reminded us both I was a person, not just a victim to be protected or a problem to be solved. Gradually, the conversations deepened. I told him about my mother, dead 5 years from fever. How she had been Omega too, but strong. How she taught me to read in secret because she said knowledge was the only thing they could not take from you. He told me about his father, yet a harsh king who valued conquest over everything. How Christopher had learned to rule through fear because that was the only model he knew. How he sometimes wondered if he was capable of being anything besides a weapon aimed at problems. You are more than that. The words escaped before I could stop them. You chose mercy when violence would have been easier. That takes strength too." His expression shifted. Vulnerable in a way I suspected few people ever witnessed. I spent my whole life learning to be hard, unmovable. "Kings who care too much make mistakes," my father said. "Show weakness and enemies exploit it." I thought about that. About the difference between weakness and compassion. Maybe your father was wrong. Maybe caring is not weakness. Maybe it is the only thing that makes power worth having. And then Christopher was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "You are wise beyond your years, Alina. I am Omega." We learn early to read people, to understand what they really mean beneath their words. It is how we survive. You should not have to just survive. His voice carried conviction. You should be able to live, to dream, to become whatever you wish without fear. "What do you dream of?" I asked. "Kings must dream too." He looked at me with eyes that held centuries of loneliness. "I dream of ruling a kingdom where protection matters more than power, where people feel safe instead of afraid, where I am more than just a conqueror." "You are already that," I said. "You just needed to remember." The kingdom transformed around us while we sat in that chamber each evening, talking, reading, slowly becoming something neither of us had expected. And not king and subject, not alpha and omega, just two people who had saved each other, learning that mercy could be its own form of strength. Outside the castle walls, mothers in marketplaces told their daughters about the alpha king who rewrote laws to protect the vulnerable. Nobles debated whether compassion made rulers weak or whether cruelty had always been the true weakness. Omega servants throughout the realm whispered hope where before they had only known fear. And in guest chambers near the king's wing, I healed. Not just my broken ribs, but something deeper. The part of me that had believed I was disposable, worthless, meant only to serve and suffer. Christopher's nightly visits, his questions about my dreams, his genuine interest in my thoughts, they rebuilt what Marcus had tried to destroy. My sense that I mattered. 3 weeks after my collapse in the Great Hall, Master Aldrich declared me fit to travel. My ribs had healed enough for the 2-day journey south to my property, my new home, my future. Christopher stood in my chambers while I prepared to leave, an awkward tension between us that had not been there before. "You will visit?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "To check on the property, to make sure everything is in order? I will visit." His eyes held promises he did not speak aloud, not just for the property. He helped me into the carriage himself, his hand lingering on mine for a breath longer than necessary. As we pulled away from the castle, I looked back at the towers where I had nearly died, where I had discovered that justice could be real, where a king had chosen to see me as human instead of disposable. The kingdom was transforming, and so was I. From victim to survivor, from servant to landowner, from invisible to seen. The journey to my future had begun, and for the first time in my 19 summers, I believed that future might hold something besides fear. 3 moons after I collapsed in the Great Hall, I walked without pain for the first time. Not the careful movements of someone protecting broken ribs, not the shallow breaths of someone afraid their body might betray them again. I walked like a person who owned her own steps, her own future, her own life. Christopher accompanied me to my estate, insisting on riding beside my carriage rather than sending guards. We traveled through spring countryside, awakening from winter's grip. Wildflowers dotted the meadows in purple and gold. Farmers worked their fields, pausing to bow as the Alpha King passed, their eyes widening when they saw an Omega woman riding in a fine carriage beside him. The journey took 2 days. We stayed at an inn the first night, and Christopher insisted I take the best room while he kept watch outside my door, protecting me still, even here, even when Marcus was long gone beyond the borders. On the second afternoon, we crested a hill and I saw it, my land. 50 acres stretching green and golden under clear sky, an orchard heavy with apple blossoms, fields ready for planting, and at the center, a cottage. Small but sturdy stone walls and a thatched roof, smoke rising from the chimney where someone had prepared it for my arrival. I owned this. The thought kept repeating, impossible and true. An Omega who once scrubbed castle floors until her knees bled now held property, paid no tribute, answered to no cruel master, free. Christopher dismounted first, then helped me from the carriage with careful courtesy. His hand lingered on mine for a breath longer than necessary. We walked through the orchard together, apple blossoms drifting like snow around us. He showed me the property markers, explained the irrigation system, pointed out where the old owners had planned to expand but never finished. "This is yours to do with as you wish." His voice carried quiet certainty. "Farm it yourself, hire workers, lease the land to others. The choice is entirely yours." I touched an apple tree, feeling rough bark beneath my palm. Real, solid, mine. The cottage was perfect. One main room with a hearth, a smaller chamber for sleeping, a kitchen with actual windows, simple furniture already arranged, clean linens on the bed, jars of preserves in the pantry, gifts from neighboring farmers who had heard an Omega woman now owned the property and wanted to welcome me. I stood in the doorway of my home and felt something break open inside my chest. Not pain this time. Something else. Joy, maybe. Or hope. Or the realization that I had survived when surviving seemed impossible. Christopher stood beside me, this alpha king who had rewritten laws to save me and 6 others. "You know my protection continues, not from obligation but choice." "I know." I turned to face him. "You chose mercy over tradition, justice over convenience. That was the most honorable thing any ruler could do. It was the only thing I could do and still face myself in the mirror." He looked at me with those ice-blue eyes that had learned gentleness. "The other women are thriving, you know. Gideon sends reports. Tell me. I wanted to hear it. Needed to know we had all found futures. Elena opened a healing house in the Northern Territories. She uses forest herbs the way her mother taught her. Sarah started a school for Omega children, teaching them to read and write. Mira established a sanctuary for Omegas fleeing abuse, giving them safe haven. The others are farming, trading, building lives they choose instead of lives forced upon them. 7 women, 7 futures that should never have been possible. And you." Christopher stepped closer, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "What will you build here, Alina?" "I do not know yet." The honesty felt right. "Maybe I will farm. Maybe I will open my doors to Omegas who need rest. Maybe I will simply learn to live without fear. That seems ambitious enough." He smiled, rare and genuine. "May I visit? Not as king checking on royal decree, but as—" He paused, searching for words. "As someone who wants to see you thrive." My heart did something complicated in my chest. As a friend? As whatever you wish me to be. His hand found mine, warm and steady. "I rewrote laws for justice, but I stayed beside your bed for something else entirely. I looked at this alpha king who had knelt beside me when I was dying, who had chosen to see me as human instead of disposable, who visited each evening to read poetry and ask about my dreams. Then yes," my voice came strong and clear. "Visit as often as you wish. As Christopher, not just as king." His relief was visible. "Thank you." So we stood in my doorway watching sun paint the countryside in gold and amber. Behind us, 6 other women were building futures. Before us, a kingdom slowly learning that mercy was strength, that protection mattered more than tradition. And between us, something fragile and new. The beginning of whatever we might become when titles did not matter. When Alpha and Omega meant nothing except 2 people who had saved each other. I had crawled through midnight corridors expecting to die. Instead, I found salvation from an impossible source. A dangerous king who chose honor over convenience, justice over profit, mercy over every rule that said people like me did not deserve it. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes it is everything. I turned to Christopher. This man who had rewritten a kingdom for 7 women who mattered to no one except him. Ready to see the rest of the property? He offered his arm like I was a lady, not a former servant. Lead the way. This is your land, your future. I am just privileged to witness it. We walked through apple blossoms and spring sunshine, and I understood something profound. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a landowner, a woman with choices. And whatever came next, I would face it not as someone disposable, but as someone who mattered. Because sometimes, against all odds, justice is real, and sometimes it changes everything. Before you go, tell me where you are watching from. And if this story touched your heart, if Alina's journey from broken servant to landowner made you believe in justice, leave a rating. Your support helps us create more stories where the vulnerable find protection, where mercy defeats cruelty, and where love grows in the most unexpected places. What did you think? Drop your thoughts below.